more organized you are and more clear that you are, it enables you to get the money that you need.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. So what other kinds of clients have you worked with? What other success stories do you have?
Oh, I've worked from grassroots, very small organizations just starting off with no staff, all the way up to universities, colleges, hospitals who just might need help on occasion or an extra pair of hands for a couple of deadlines. But I'm very lucky. I work with some of the greatest people in the world. They really want to change their corner of the universe and make it better. So they're working in this nonprofit area to help the mentally ill, troubled families, whatever. You know, they're doing their part. And I get to help them articulate why it's important.
Now, when you sit down with a client, you meet with a client, what do you tell them? How do you start organizing them?
It depends on each client and what they need. Not surprisingly, a lot of people call me with the initial inquiry about proposal writing. Given I do a lot of workshops on proposal writing, I've written a book on it, it's really not a surprise. So if that's the case, I work with them on developing sound proposals. And to give you an example of that, one of my clients is Wayside Youth and Family Support Network here in Framingham. A few years ago, they needed to build a new campus to consolidate their space. They serve 5,000 youth and families in eastern and central Massachusetts. I wrote one grant alone that was $500,000, 20% of the cost of this consolidated campus. I also researched other potential funders for them and raised more money from that list. All told, it was about $660,000 for that particular project.
Wow. And how do you orchestrate that? You sit down with them, you find out what their goals are, and then you do the research as to where they can best find the money?
Right. It's almost like being a matchmaker in a sense. You have a client with a specific need and filling a community need and have specific program or programs to do it. And you have to find the funders that are interested in that particular area or that particular field in that particular kind of program. So it's tricky getting the right funder, one for your geography, two for the type of service you provide. You might have a funder in your town, but they only like to fund education. Well, that doesn't help you if you're doing social services or vice versa. So there is an art to it. And what people don't understand is when the economy is poor, like we have a recession now, if individuals are giving less, they think maybe turning to grants, that will solve their problems. But foundations also have less to give. So there are less grants being written right now when the stock market's depreciated.
So it seems like in this kind of economy, it's more important than ever to really be clear, you know, what you're doing, why you need the money, and also approaching the right funding source.
That's right. Just approaching 100 foundations, for example, might not be the way to go. It almost always is not the right way to go. You might only want to ask a few that you really have a good fit with.
Okay, because is it that, do the funders talk to each other?
Oh, yes.
Oh, they do?
Absolutely.
So if you sent out a blanket thing to 100, potential funders, they would be saying, oh yeah, they sent it out to everybody. And would that be a bad thing?
Well, yes, it could be a bad thing. Many cases, the kinds of funders that tend to talk to each other are those who you've identified, for example, in your proposal, because you have to show this is a program you can fund, and you have to show them how it's sustainable, so that if they give you their dollar, you're not going to be closing the door in 3 months because you can't keep the doors open. So usually they ask, who else have you approached? Or,
they do.
Or what's your development plan to raise money? Because we're not going to fund this forever. You know, a good window might be 3 years for a foundation to fund you, and then they move on. Typically, there are exceptions. So you have to show them what your plan is to raise this money and then replace their money. So yeah, if they know that your foundation is being asked for half and you're asking another one for half, they might call that foundation and say, are you in? Because we're not going to give them half if they need
the other half.
If they need the other half to even pull this off, to open the doors, yeah.
So that's where they would talk to each other.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I mean, it also strikes me that it would be important to have somebody such as yourself who knows who's out there. and knows the right fit and
That's
who
right.
to ask.
That's right, because honestly, it's just not worth somebody's money to pay a consultant to write them or to help them in a failing venture. And interestingly, the state law is such that I'm a for-profit business, but it's still my fiduciary duty to inform a nonprofit what's in their best interest, not my company's best interest. So
Okay.
I do that anyway, but it's actually the law. That's what you're supposed to do. You can't go in and sell a service to write a proposal, for example, to somebody that you know they have no shot at getting money from. And I would not be. I would actually be breaking my responsibility ethically and legally if I were telling them, yeah, I can take your money and I'm going to do that for you.
So, so people aren't just hiring you to write a grant; they're really hiring you to consult them on the grant. You know, on is this grant even a possibility?
Well, that's right. And I belong to the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And there's a whole field of, it's called development. And you really want to get somebody who's well versed in the field, because you can get in so much trouble as a nonprofit in terms of losing credibility, getting into unethical practices, which could tarnish your fundraising efforts for years and years. And you don't want to do that. So
How would you do that? How would you? I'm just kind of curious. How would you tarnish your fundraising abilities? I mean, don't use any names, of course.
No.
But what could be some breakdowns? Like if you try to do it on your own, or if you're uneducated about the process. Because I know there's people out there. I mean, so many people say, "Oh, we'll get a grant." You know,
Right,
we want
right,
to do
right.
this, or we'll get some money. We'll do a grant. And I think a lot of people think, well. Yeah, I mean, you have to be a nonprofit to write a grant, don't you? Or no?
You have to be a public charity, a specific type of nonprofit to receive a grant, as a matter of fact. Yeah.
So you have to be a public charity.
That's right, a 501c3 designated public charity by the IRS.
Okay, so that's a specific designation.
But just to give you an example, like, for example, a public charity are the only entities in Massachusetts that can legally hold raffles as fundraisers. So if you go out in any town in the Commonwealth, you'll see groups holding raffles. You'll see for-profit businesses holding raffles. You'll see sports leagues that aren't incorporated running raffles. And not only do you have to be a nonprofit with a 501c3 status, you have to be incorporated for 2 years. There are just so many laws and regulations about nonprofits and fundraising that you can get into trouble without even realizing it, not knowing the regulations, not knowing the laws, let alone bigger issues like using monies in ways for which it was restricted, it wasn't intended, self-dealing, profiting yourself as opposed to having it go to the nonprofit. So there are a ton of ways you can get in trouble and, you know, inadvertently with the best intentions, hurt a nonprofit's reputation.
Okay. I'm thinking.
I know where to start. Yeah.
Wait a minute. I know we had a raffle, but it was done by a nonprofit, so
That's okay.
that's okay. Okay, Carl. I have to always check with you.
Absolutely.
So let's get more into the grant writing. So you've written a book on it.
Yes.
Now, I know you did it with Gail Shapiro. You're co-authors. So what inspired you to do the book? I know you've been doing the grant writing or the proposal writing. So you do the proposal to get the grant. Is that how it goes?
That's correct.
Okay.
Well said. Perfectly said.
Because people are always saying grant writing. It's really not grant writing. It's like you get the grant, but you do the proposal
That's
to
right.
get the grant.
That's right. It's the person who writes the check for the money. They write the grant.
Okay, great. Okay, so now we've got that straight. The giver of the money writes the grant.
Correct.
Okay, good. And so, but your book is called Get That Grant.
The Quick Start Guide to Successful Proposals.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we actually did this because, well, for two reasons. One, as a proposal reviewer with the Metro West Community Healthcare Foundation for many years, I read a lot of grants that were not well written. And the economy is just such, there's so many nonprofits in this state, more than 25,000. There's such vast competition for grants that you have to do it really well to get it. Better than ever. So you don't want to put out a bad product, one. You want to write it, you want to know the terminology, you want to give what's requested, that sort of thing. So one is for the nonprofit market. Because right now there are a lot of volunteers that are being pressed into writing them that don't know the rules, don't know the field. So one, it can help people like that. But also we get a lot of calls from writers who want to get into the grant writing business or the proposal writing business, who know they know how to write. Perhaps they have a background in journalism or other writing fields, technical writing. And maybe their nonprofit has said, oh, you're a writer, would you write us some grant proposals? But they don't really know how to do them. So it was also aimed for folks like that who might want to enter the field.
So